Welcome everyone to the workshop. It's mostly gonna be me talking and kind of less hands-on, but still hoping to get a lot of learnings across. And over the next 25 minutes or so, we're gonna be delving deeper into the UX and UI and product side of the space. So yeah, to get started, who am I? So my name is Ja. I go by XYZ online, and I specialize in UX UI design. I've been doing it for 4 years in the space. So today we'll dive into practical ways you as developers can implement user-centric design principles into your dApps to enhance the user experience without really sacrificing the functionality. So just to get an idea of how the audience is, how many of us here are developers, by the show of hands? Okay. And non-tech people, like sales, marketing? Okay, awesome. Yeah, hopefully we'll have learnings for everyone here. That was my idea while designing the slides. So the goals of this workshop is we'll start with the importance of UX in Web3. From there, we'll cover the core principles of user-centered design that you can apply to your own projects. Next up, we'll take a close look at some bad and good examples in action, including a very detailed breakdown of MetaMask and Rainbow Wallet's UIs, kind of comparing them, see who does it wrong, who does it right. And finally, I'll share some practical design tips to end the workshop, and we'll wrap up with a quick Q&A. So feel free to note down any questions you might have as we go. Awesome, so let's get started. What is UX in Web3? So what exactly does UX mean in the context of Web3? Unlike Web2, which focuses on the simplicity and user-friendliness of flows, Web3 introduces entirely new concepts like wallets, gas fees, private keys, decentralized apps, like all those jargons that you see around, smart contracts and stuff like that. And many of these terms aren't really familiar to the average user. And our challenge as builders in this space is to take this new complexity that's associated with the space and make it digestible. So in Web2, people are used to having seamless interfaces. There's a lot of money, a lot of research has been done in the last 10 years to get the UX to where it's at right now. So people are used to having seamless interfaces like banking apps or social media platforms that provide instant feedback and very smooth interactions, because there has been a lot of research and resources that has been poured in to make how the UX is in Web2 at the stage where it's at right now. But Web3, since it's still like a very new field, it's often very, very fragmented. And the user flow that's out there can be very, very intimidating still. And the challenge right now is that we need to move away from this complex tech-heavy interface to a system that invites and welcomes everyday new users. And that's why this is one of the things that's going to help us onboard the next million users. Like that's been a jargon every project uses, that, oh, you're going to onboard the next billion users to the space, but the UX isn't good. There's no way average everyday user feels even invited to use your app or project. So there are three main user personas as I see it in Web3 right now. So it has a variety of users, from early adopters to mainstream users. And understanding these personas is very crucial for designing an interface that works for everyone. So you kind of have to know who you're really catering to. You cannot make it for everyone. Like, it's a very big challenge. So knowing who you're designing it for, who you're making your product for, is one of the very important early steps you need to take. Let's go through early adopters first. They're very tech-savvy. They expect very advanced functionalities, and they're very adept on navigating the complexity associated with your app, because, yeah, they are early adopters. They are always looking for new challenges and stuff like that. And the way the space started a few years ago, especially when I got involved back in 2020, 2021, most of the user base that was there in the famous apps at that point were early adopters. So there was no need for them at that point to kind of focus on design, doing good UX and stuff like that, because the adopters that were there at that time were very adept technically. So even if they were given like a very basic HTML landing page, they could still make it work until the backend worked. But that's not the case anymore. Now there has been a lot of resources being poured in. There has been a lot of money being poured in as well, and we as a space need to grow and get more new people in who are not early adopters. So that is where the real challenge of making a good user experience comes into play. Second are tech enthusiasts. Often they might not be aware of nuances associated with your app or project, but are very keen to explore around. They'll definitely need some guidances, but still really, really appreciate control over what's happening and what's going on in your project. And third, and the main thing is the mainstream users. That is what we are looking to onboard. Like that's who everyone talks about, mainstream users, getting the next million users onboarded. And mainstream users, they need simplicity. They are often confused by all the jargons, all the technical things like private keys and gas fees and nonce and everything that's being used. And complexity can often, very often scare them off. Like I've, at multiple points, done a lot of user research as a part of the projects I've been working with. And this has come up one too many times that all these use of jargons, not explaining what's going on behind the scenes and everything, really scare these people off. And often a person who was supposed to be your first user just drops off just because of that. So a great UI, UX, a great user interface and user experience should serve all of these personas by being very adaptable and intuitive. So what I mean by adaptable is that you know who you're catering to. Make sure it's a very conscious thing while you design your applications, while you design your user flows, while you do your information architecture. Be very conscious about that, and make sure it really hits the mark. Maybe do some user research, look at what they want, look at what they would appreciate, what they would not like, and then adapt it to them. That's like a very short way of getting started with your project. Now, why UX is critical in Web3? Now, it's a no-brainer question, but still, like, let's go over that. So the UX right now in the space can be the difference between the success or the failure of your application or the project. Why? Because all these blockchain-based actions like signing a transaction or interacting with a smart contract are very intimidating to users who don't understand what's happening in the background. Like I started being with a very non-technical background when I was just starting out. And these things took me a long, long time to get started because all of the times I associated these hard things as the issues that are out there, and these scare people off. So users need to trust the process, and if they are unsure, they'll just drop off. So making sure that what you design, what you create, what you build, it needs to induce trust in who you are building for. And trust is like paramount right now. Like people, like you basically have control over their assets, their monies and everything. And that is where the real challenge comes into play as well, because it kind of appeals to a human emotion. Because if I have some of my own skin in the game, I need to trust you that you are managing it well for me. And users need to trust the process, and if they're unsure, they'll drop off. And this can very often lead to very slow adoption rates of your app. And that's what we are seeing with more than half the projects in the space right now is it starts off pretty well, and just third day onwards, it just drops off. So you don't, so the first part is to get users into it. That's one thing, but getting them hooked onto it, getting them to use it is a completely different ballgame altogether. So many Web3 platforms still struggle with retaining users because of their confusing UIs, and this was one of my biggest takeaways from ETHCC in Brussels in July. I tested out a lot of apps for people. I was doing like a free consultancy thing for projects, and it's good that a lot of projects now are kind of focusing on UI. The UI looks good, but once you think of yourself as a user and you dug deeper into it, it just makes no sense. It just is the same old thing about the jargon, same old thing about the complexity, the eye candy thing. Like they only focus on the eye candies and not the actual UX side of things. So remember that Web3 is still in its early stages, and the designs we create right now can define the future of the entire ecosystem. Hello guys, join in. Just getting started. Yeah, so so that's UX in Web3. Yeah, let's go over some example. So I love hating on MetaMask. It's one of the biggest things in the space right now. It's very unfortunate that most of the new users who come to the space get started with MetaMask, and that is the first experience they get. I feel sorry for them. So this is what a typical transaction confirmation page looks like in MetaMask. And as you can see, the language here is cryptic. We see terms like gas limit, estimated fees, amount plus gas fees. And these terms are native to the blockchain world, but most confusing for most users. Like when I was just starting out, I remember I didn't do my first transaction for 3 straight months just because of how bad it all looked and how unsure I was. So I had to have a developer friend with me who was making me understand, okay, you put confirm gas fees means this, you put in some money, this gas fees is nothing but a transaction fees. They should just call that. So that is what we are dealing with in the space right now. Of course, they've done some improvements over the last few months, but it's still not there. So the average user probably doesn't understand what gas fee means. And they might think it's a random extra charge or something, and there's no clear explanation of how this really affects the transaction. Like, I was talking to a guy here yesterday, and he was just a new student who was just getting into everything. And every time I meet a new person, I'd like to do this kind of user research with them on how they think the space is, and just as a point of view of a new person, right? And of course, he got started with MetaMask as well. And even though MetaMask has done a lot of changes, it's still not evident. It's still out there as one of the shittiest user experiences ever. So yeah, and the average user probably doesn't understand what gas fee means, and the numbers like the max fee and total are complex, and they're displayed in both crypto and fiat, adding to that confusion. So this is not just overwhelming, it's actually dangerous, because users could mistakenly approve transactions without fully understanding the costs or risks, right? Because in order to do anything, you have to understand what's the risk that's associated with it, and also what's coming along. Like, that's one of the main points of user experience design, is that you keep users aware, you keep them very aware of what's happening, what's gonna happen, and use some psychology, some templates. We'll look into it later in the presentation, but yeah. And the impact of this bad UI on user behavior is that, now imagine a user interacting with this interface, right? They either give up or proceed with a lot of uncertainty. Like, neither scenario is great. Like, even if they are confused, that's not a good UX. If they proceed with uncertainty, that's even worse, because you risk letting a user drop off, right? And when users are unsure, they either abandon the transaction or, yeah, they either abandon the transaction, because when they do it, it costs your dApp and developers potential engagement and revenue as well. So just from a business point of view, it's bad. From a UX point of view, it's bad. From a developer point of view, it's worse. Yeah, it's not a good scenario at all. So, or they often make errors as well, leading to a failed transaction, and that gets added to the complexity. And this whole thing, this whole shebang, creates a friction for mass adoption of blockchain tech, because UX plays a critical role exactly here in bridging that gap of people joining in, being a newcomer to the industry and actually getting started. Now, this was a bad example. Let's take a look at a good example of the same thing, the same transaction flow is, I love the Rainbow app. I don't know if you've seen it around, but yeah, let's contrast this with the same process of Rainbow Wallet. Notice how clean and simple the interface is as compared to this, whatever this is. So take a good look what you will do there. And this is the Rainbow app. So Rainbow replaces these cryptic languages with very human-friendly explanations. Terms like speed up and slow down are explain transaction speed instead of jargons that we talked about, like gas fees and stuff like that. And the fee calculation is still there, like it's still there, like in MetaMask. But the UI itself presents it in a much more digestible way to the user. And the primary focus is on user action. So either you approve this, that is sign, or cancel the whole transaction. And that's a big UX thing that you don't bombard users with a lot of choice, with a lot of things. Maximum have like 2 things you want to have them do. It's usually proceed or cancel, and make that look very primary, in a primary way. So the primary focus here is on user action of sign, and the secondary focus is on cancel. But the details are still accessible, but as you see here, like there are a lot of details everywhere. And it's the same here, the details are accessible, but they are hidden for those who don't need them. So if I'm a new user, I'm a product designer who's going through the flow. I don't need to always check the hex or like the deepest technical details every time. Maybe if you're a developer, it makes sense for you. So this is what I mean by catering to your users. So Rainbow knows that their users are everyone, even non-technical people as well as deeply technical people. And that's where they came up with the idea of hiding behind the details for those who don't need them. Yeah. And that's where we have the worse and good UI. And Rainbow has a very clean visual hierarchy as well. And the primary action of signing a transaction or canceling the transaction is front and center. And all additional information that is there is a secondary thing throughout the UI. And MetaMask, on the other hand, doesn't prioritize user action as well. It throws too much information at you. You have like so many things going on. There's some error going on here. There's like a random thing that's not even explained. The buttons aren't that big of an attention grabber as well. So Rainbow's clean, uncluttered design reduces this user anxiety that we are talking about and improve the trust that we talked about, which is very essential when dealing with these financial transactions, because trust is the paramount thing, especially when it comes to financial transactions, because you're dealing with someone else's money, and money is the thing people care about. So, yeah. Now, what's the impact of this bad UI on the users? Like, there has to be some impact, right? So the consequences are that users who encounter confusing interfaces are more than likely to abandon your app. In turn, just letting your revenues down, letting your user base down. And a confusing UI also leads to a very high error rate. So people might accidentally send too much crypto. Like, I've been seeing it in my Twitter feed for a while that things are going on, and someone mistakenly sent 5 ETH to someone they didn't intend to. And using the wrong wallet or interacting with the wrong smart contract. So at the end of the day, bad UX hurts your retention rates and your reputation as well. And users won't come back if they don't trust your platform. And how you make users trust your platform is through a good UX and really doubling down on that. So how do we solve that? Here are some core principles that I like to use of this user-centric design in Web3. So just a recap of what user-centric design is. You keep users as the paramount thing. You design for them. So users are at the center of every decision you take, especially when it comes to the product, the information architecture, the flow side of things. And these are the 5 core principles of that. So let's shift gears and talk about how we can do better. So first one's empathy. Now, what's empathy? It's always designing users with the user in your mind, putting yourself in the user's shoe, see how they think, how they act, how they might react to your app. They might not have the technical background you do, so really putting yourself in their shoes. Simplicity is second. It's about reducing the unnecessary complexity. focusing on what the user needs to accomplish and removing anything that distracts from that goal. Now, this goal can be a business goal, this goal can be a user goal, this goal can be just as a product goal, like you can set up a goal, and simplicity will be a very nice way for you to like lead towards that particular goal. And third is feedback. It's one of the most important things. And that's what we are missing in the space right now, is because, so feedback's basically keeping users informed at every step, whether they're confirming a transaction or waiting for it to process, giving them real-time feedback. Also, what a feedback is iteration. What we call iteration is that we do something, we test it out with the users, see if they like it. If they don't, go back to the drawing board, change things again, and do the same thing over again. And that's what we are missing in the space right now, because what I see in projects is that the whole product development workflow is very linear. So it starts with coming up with the idea, smart contracts happen, products made, audits happen, and then people figure out, oh, this is not something users actually want. And now it's very hard to go back to the drawing board and change things up because smart contracts already done. It's one of the most expensive things ever to change that. So getting design in the room early on is a very very underrated thing, and it's one of the things that can just make or break your thing, because once you have design in room early on, it's much more faster and much more cheaper to just test it out with the users, create a Figma prototype, see how users react to it, and just change what you want later on. So feedback is that keep users informed at every step, whether they're confirming a transaction, waiting for it, or giving them real-time feedback of where they are. Accessibility is also something very underlooked on. So your designs should be usable for everyone. So I use usable and not catering to everyone. So catering means your user base is someone different. If my user base is Gen Zs who are just getting into the space and I'm designing for them, that's a different thing. Accessibility is, for example, if I have a visual impairity, right? So that means like attention to color contrast or font size and alternative input methods. Like this could also, it's a very human thing to integrate in your apps. And the biggest thing for me is consistency. Like as developers, like I was a developer for a long time, and I know it's very hard to do designs, create design systems. And one of the biggest cheat codes I found to actually do it and do it right was consistency. So what that means is users should always feel confident that your interface works the same way across different pages. So if you're using a particular button element, just use that throughout your app. Don't change it. If it's black and white, sure, let it be. Use the same element throughout. Use the same patterns and terms throughout your app. It shouldn't change. And that's one of the cheat codes. If you have like a set of certain elements like input, input ways or some certain elements, some text styles that you're using. So that's like create like a small style guide or a design system. Shouldn't take a long time. Takes like 1 hour to begin with. But then after that, it's so scalable that whatever you do with your app in the future, it's always there. It's always growing. And that's one of the biggest cheat codes, to not start with having a designer on board. Even as developers, you can do that. Of course, Tailwind exists, stuff like that exists. But there's something about creating your own custom elements that sets your thing very, very apart from your competitors, for sure. So principle 1, let's go over all of these 5 a bit more in detail. So empathy is about putting yourself in users' shoes. So in Web3, that means recognizing the most users who won't be blockchain experts. And you need to provide clear instructions and a path forward at every stage of interaction. Walk them through each step of a transaction, for example. Think about how complex processes like staking or yield farming can be broken down into simpler, understandable, and very manageable steps. And a good way is to always ask, what's the user goal? What might confuse them? And how can we offer more support? And through these 3 questions, like you've already got empathy side of things sorted out. So if you ask, what's the user goal? What might confuse them? And how can we offer more support? You are done with the empathy part. Simplicity is arguably, I think, according to me, one of the most important principles, because the goal is to make the interface so intuitive that users can complete the task without thinking too hard. So the idea is to not make any user think hard at all. Like just think of them as, I don't want to use the word, but just think that users are stupid. They don't know what's going on. They shouldn't think that hard. So avoid overwhelming users with technical jargon. For example, instead of showing a full breakdown of gas fees and what's going on, show them a simple slider of transaction speed and then explain what happens if they choose a slower or faster transaction, right? And a good test for simplicity is that asking yourself, can your app be used by someone who has zero Web3 experience? If the answer is no, simplify it further. It's not there yet. Third one's feedback. So the transactions, as we know, are not instant at all. And users often have no idea, especially the new ones, what's happening behind the scenes. And that's one of the problems I had as well, because I remember the first transaction I did on my own was sending some ETH over. And that was like at the peak of bull market. And the transaction fees was high, the waiting time was a lot. And I was so scared that I was going to lose all my money because I had no idea what's going on. Thank you, MetaMask. So without feedback, users may think the app is broken, leading them to even cancel the transaction or try again, which in turn causes even more confusion and potential errors later on. So it's very important to provide confirmation at every stage so users know what they've just done and what will happen next. And accessibility, it's a key part of good UX. So you want to make sure your app is usable by everyone, including users with disability. For example, color contrast is critical for visually impaired users. For example, what I mean by color contrast is there's a few really good color contrast checkers online. There's one by Adobe, and you can use that in your app. So what I mean by color contrast is, for example, if a background is yellow, a blue text will not do well. It won't sit right on the eyes. It will hurt your eye up. Font size is a very important aspect as well. So make sure your text is large enough to be read comfortably on all devices, including mobile. And it's like also a personal thing is that whenever I design, I make sure I design apps mobile first, because a lot of our users are coming through mobile first of all. That's what I've been noticing as a trend. So make sure you design mobile first. You can do it, you cannot, but what good it does is that you have a very good idea of all the sizes and everything that you can just carry over, because if you have mobile set, web version is just a broader thing. You can just add some more space and that's it. But going the other way around, doing website, desk version first and then the mobile adds a bit more complexity. That's just a personal trick. So accessibility isn't just about compliance, it's about ensuring that everyone can use your app, which ultimately also expands your user base. And yeah, the biggest one, consistency. If your approve button is blue on one page and green on another, users may second guess whether they are performing the same action. And that's what I meant by consistency. If you have a certain button of a certain type, and if it's a primary button, just use that throughout your app the same way. And consistency in layout and design patterns is especially very important in Web3, because as users become familiar with specific interactions like signing transactions, they should experience the same flow across different screens and interaction. The experience should be the same. And design consistency is also about building trust. So when users see familiar elements and predictable flows, they feel confident navigating your app. And consistency also really reduces the cognitive load on the user, on a human brain. So the more predictable your interface is, the easier it becomes for users to focus on their task instead of figuring out the interface itself, because that's one of the problems I see with developers, that they think of design as very creative thing. It's like a graphic thing. Oh, it should look good on this page, but it's not. UI UX is more about consistency, more about using the same patterns than about graphic design or making a good art or aesthetic and stuff. So again, a big thing is using plain language in your UI. I cannot focus on it as much, because plain language makes your interface more accessible to users who aren't familiar with the tech. A lot of Web3 apps still use terms like nonce, hash, or even gas and stuff like that without really explaining what they mean. Now, while these are important for developers, they're confusing for the average users, obviously, because when the users face these kind of jargons, they're likely to either abandon the app or proceed without fully understanding what's happening, and both are bad outcomes. So instead translate technical terms into simple, actionable language. For example, instead of saying gas fees, say transaction fees. It's just a one-word change, but it makes a lot of difference. The goal really with this is to make the experience feel intuitive and human, even when dealing with complex and seemingly hard technology like the whole of Web3. And another big thing that I might recommend is visual hierarchy. So as you noticed, how big of a difference just changing the sizes of the text does. Its visual hierarchy basically means how you guide users' attention to the most important parts of your interface. So in Web3, where there's often a lot of technical information, good visual hierarchy ensures that users don't really feel overwhelmed by details, and it helps them focus on the primary task. For example, if the main goal is to approve a transaction, the button should stand out the most, while secondary information like transaction details or gas fees should be less prominent. And that's one of the problems we saw with MetaMask. There's no visual hierarchy. It's, most of the things are the same font size, same thing. It's very hard to decipher. You have to put in a lot of cognitive load to know what's going on there. So using font sizes, colors, and especially spacing to create a hierarchy is a good practice. Larger, bolder text draws the eyes first, followed by smaller and lighter text. And by creating a clear visual pathway, you help users make decisions much more faster and with much more confidence. And that, in turn, again, builds up your trust. A good thing, big thing, is error handling as well. And errors, as we know, are very inevitable in the space, especially when users are interacting with the blockchain and networks that may experience delays or require specific inputs. The key to good UX is how you handle these errors. So instead of showing generic error messages like error 403, explain what went wrong in human terms. For example, if a transaction fails because of insufficient funds, don't just display an error message and be done with it. Say something like, your wallet doesn't have enough funds to complete this transaction. Please add more funds and try again. And put a primary button there where they are led to the flow where you add your transaction, you add money to your wallet. So good error handling helps users recover quickly from mistakes and prevents them from feeling frustrated or lost. And if they're feeling frustrated or lost, again, it's a loss of revenue again. Also, a big thing is to provide clear options for users to correct the error. For example, if a form field is incorrect, highlight that and offer a suggestion for the correct format. And if a transaction goes wrong, if the fund is insufficient, lead them to the flow where they can add more funds in the wallet. So some hidden features for advanced users. So Web3 often caters to both beginners and advanced users, as we took a look at the wallet apps. And a very good approach is to hide advanced features behind menus or options, so beginners are not overwhelmed. And that's one of the biggest good things Rainbow did, was that they hid all the advanced things behind a tab. And all the main things was the only thing that was right front and center. So for example, show basic transaction details by default, but also allow advanced users to expand a section for more granular controls like gas fee customization and stuff like that. So this progressive disclosure, often this approach ensures that beginners can use the app without feeling intimidated, while power users still have access to all these functionalities they need. So you don't need to tell all these power users to fuck off. They should be kept in mind as well. It's just that you are finding like a common ground between the beginners and power users. So by keeping these advanced features out of sight, what you do is you essentially reduce that cognitive load we were talking about on new users and make the interface look much more simpler and more approachable as well. So instead of dumping all things all at once, you have it like more laid out more structured, hidden beneath tabs. So it feels much more approachable, much more simpler. And also a big thing is the interaction design in Web3. And this is often very overlooked. And in my opinion, if you do it right, it just takes your interface up at least 3 points. So a good interaction design is essential for making your app feel responsive and intuitive. So every action a user takes, whether it's hovering on a button, whether it's clicking a button, approving a transaction, or even interacting with a dApp on a whole, they should have immediate feedback. For example, if a user clicks on approve transaction, don't just leave them hanging there. Show them a loading spinner, a progress bar, or even a simple message like transaction is processing. And without this immediate feedback, users will think the app is broken or something going wrong, or that their action didn't register, leading to, again, confusion or repeated actions. So this interaction design makes your app feel much more alive, reducing that uncertainty we were talking about that users may feel while interacting with slower processes. And micro-interaction is, again, one of these things. They are small but subtle animations or feedback mechanisms that make your app feel much more polished and user-friendly. It makes it look much more bougie. So for example, when a user hovers over a button, it might change color or animate slightly to show that it's clickable. Or when a transaction is successful, you could show a brief confirmation animation. So these small touches really, really help users. Like that, I've been seeing a lot because I do freelance and contract work. And whenever I've done these small micro-interaction things, the feedback has been much, much more positive. Like the users think, okay, this is much more polished. If I hover on a button, it has a nice shadow effect. It changes colors. It's literally just like 5 extra minutes of CSS change. But it's a lot of good points to it. So these small touches help users feel much more engaged with your app, giving them, again, confidence that their action is registering. And especially in Web3, where users are often dealing with longer transaction times or unfamiliar processes, these micro-interactions provide reassurance. And they create a more human and interactive feel, which essentially is important in making the whole tech feel accessible to a wider audience and also feel human in the end. And again, let's go real-time feedback as well. So without clear feedback, users are left wondering if their action was successful or the app crashed. So always provide some form of real-time feedback, whether it's a progress bar or a spinning loader or even a notification that explains what's going on behind the scenes. For example, if a user submits a transaction, show them the steps it's going through, like awaiting confirmation, transaction pending on the blockchain, how long it might take. So this transparency reduces frustration and keeps users informed during what would otherwise feel like a uncertain or confusing process. And some closing remarks and some takeaways from all this thing. So we've covered a lot today. It was almost 40 minutes now. First, always design with user in mind. Design with the user, keep yourself in the user's shoe. Empathy is the key. Make sure your interface is intuitive, simple, and accessible. Ask if it is something that someone with very less experience can use. Use feedback, both in terms of real-time interaction and error handling, to keep users informed and engaged, and also user feedback on the app, what they're talking about it. If they suggest some change, if they have some confusing some places, keep experimenting with it and iterating your app's design. And finally, remember that consistency and simplicity are your best tools for reducing friction in any interface you do. They're like cheat code to it. So with these principles in mind, you can actually go ahead and build your project from now on that are not only functionable, but also very enjoyable for users as well. And I like to end with this quote by Ben Schwabstein, is that amazing UX doesn't make your product valuable, but bad UX can make your product useless. And that's something to think about. That's it. Thank you. So if you want to connect anywhere, let me know. If you want to get access to the slides, I'll be more than happy to share it to you. Just drop me a text on either Twitter or LinkedIn. Should I go through them? Yeah.